So put your hands together for Professor Kine, please. Put your hands.
All right, well, I am thrilled to introduce our speaker. This is a big reason why I love being a professor here. So Michael was my PhD student, and I told you I did 2 companies through Y Combinator. So Michael's company was the last company to go through Y Combinator. So this is my 6th startup. And Michael came to my lab after he got his bachelor's degree in bioengineering from San Diego, and he worked in my lab for several years. And then, I know Michael's going to talk about the story, but my son was born with a collapsed lung, and we ended up repurposing some technology that had been sitting in the lab to be able to monitor breathing. And so this has been Michael's day and night for the last several years, and it's been a wild ride, I think. Lots of ups and downs, but I'm super impressed with Michael stepping into this, senior leadership role. I think that this Entrepreneur Center also has, hopefully, good memories for Michael. He actually got married here. So 2 years ago now? A year and a half ago.
A year and a quarter, so still remember the months.
But this is definitely the best part of the job, is to get a student, spend not only 5 years with them, but stay on with them for the rest of the journey as they launch their careers, as they get married and have families and everything. So I love this. So welcome back, Michael.
Thank you. Should I use can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so, thank you for that introduction, Michelle. I realize I've spent more time in SoCal at the university than I have outside of just growing up in my home back in NorCal. So it's really fun to find a community, a group of people here that you can really work well with, and and having this course as well, and having the YC name attached to that course is huge also. So I was just telling Michelle, I think this is the first class of its kind in any of the UC systems, so it's pretty cool. So I'm sure, YC, they pretty informal, so no presentation, no nothing. I see myself as a resource to you guys. I've gone through YC, gone through multiple other accelerators, including UC Launch, and so I want you guys to ask me any questions you might have as we go, because I can just stand up here and lecture you on everything I've learned in the past 3 years, but it's better if you guys have focused questions for me that you want answers to. So I'll be that resource for you guys today. So just starting out, just want to get a sense of who are undergraduates in this class, graduate students, okay? Do we have anyone in the STEM field in here? And then about non-STEM, maybe business field. So it's pretty even distribution. And you guys all know YC, right? Presumably, and then their course and what they're doing, so, okay. Okay, so today, topic is finding the problem and ideating and finding a solution. And that by itself is huge, right? You can't cover it within 30 minutes. But what I'm going to do is just tell you kind of the highest level things I've learned. And as I come up with my topics, please ask questions on anything more detailed and specific. Okay, so I'm sure YC's already hammered it into you. If you want to find a problem, you talk to the users, customers. And why do we do that? Anyone? Why don't I, I'm an academic, or I did academics for a while. So I just go online and look up the problem on some journal paper and go, oh, look, this big problem. All right, add your hand.
Solve a real problem, sort of wasting your time. I think this is the solution versus here's the actual problem, here's a potential solution.
Exactly. So instead of going, I think this is the problem, research A on journal B said this big problem in respiration monitoring because there's no good monitor out there. When you actually go and talk to a nurse and be like, what's the actual problem in the NICU? Does it really matter? You learn so much more, right? So YC, any accelerator, they're going to hammer it into you, talk to your customers, understand what the problem is. You might find new problems that you want to solve, right? So I've talked to multiple nurses thinking respiration monitoring during sedation is a big problem, right? And then I go in, I look at the numbers, and I think, well, it is a scary problem, but is it really that big? You have 300,000 people being sedated and maybe one death every year. So then you go, well, it's terrible that that one person died, right? But then to an investor, someone who cares about money, they will go like, well, you know, one death, you're not going to have a good product out of that. So you continue to talk to more nurses and more doctors, and then we eventually found out, hey, look at the NICU, like exactly what Michelle saw in the very beginning. There are no monitors in that space. And this didn't come about from reading papers. This came about from talking to maybe 50 nurses, 30 doctors, and them just going, you know, I think this might be a pretty good product. That's not the answer you want to hear. You want them to say, oh my God, we need this. Can we have it tomorrow, right? And that's what we heard from different markets. And finally, the last thing is you can find the problem, but how do you know what they want, right? So I can say, I'm going to come up with a respiratory monitor, but does it have to be wireless? Does it have to be wired? Oh.
The back door is blowing you out.
Oh,
so now you're,
sorry.
Now you're
Okay, so does it have to be wired? Should it be wireless? Should I spend the money to make it wired? Will there be, or to make it wireless, will there be any problems? These are all questions that can only be answered through the nurses and doctors or for your end customer segment. So any questions here? You know, pretty basic stuff. YC should cover most of this. Yes?
So when you were talking about like figuring out that problem, at what point do you think it's like, okay, I'm taking in too much information, I'm not even identifying that problem?
Oh, that's a really good. So this process is not black and white, right? You're not going to go in and the nurse is going to be like, oh yeah, we have problem A, B, and C for you to solve. They're going to go in and be like, oh, you're an engineer? Let me tell you every single thing that I think is wrong within the ICU. Too many wires, too many monitors. We would love to have a single device that's wireless, that does everything. And then as an engineer in this field, I just sit there thinking, oh man, that's not possible. But I just go with it, and then out of everything they say, you might find one little thing that you hear repeated throughout a bunch of nurses, a bunch of doctors, and then you zone in on that and be like, oh, I think this might be a problem. So for example, we talk to a bunch of nurses, and they go, man, to calculate respiration rate, we have to stand there with our watch for 60 seconds and measure how long they're breathing. Right? It's pretty archaic. And they go, 60 seconds is a long time for us, right? If you could do it in 10 seconds, that'd be great. So out of everything, all of the noise they tell you, you have to go in and pick it out. And that generally comes from talking to a lot of people and just finding that repeated pattern. All right, great question. Okay, so that kind of ties into the next part, which is how do we do this? And I'm gonna depart a little from Y Combinator and go into some of the stuff I learned from another accelerator called UC Launch. So UC Launch is a UC-specific accelerator. They have, you know, a similar like 10-week course or so, and then you go up to Berkeley Haas School of Business and, you know, pitch to some people, get some small amount of money. But they really, what I liked about it was, you know, I'm an engineer. I like things following the scientific method, a nice logical progression. I thought interviews were this black box where you go left and right and, you know, have no direction. But the way they talked about it was that when you go out to do your interviews, you're basically coming up with a hypothesis and trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis, right? So how would I start this? Before I even go out and talk to any of my end customers, I'll do some basic research, right? Understand their lingo, understand what they're looking for. And then I'll come up with a hypothesis. So for example, I do my reading. I see, oh, look, Journal B says that respiration is very poorly monitored within hospitals. And then my hypothesis becomes, well, I think it's poorly monitored because the nurses don't have a automated way of doing this. Then I come up with my questions, I go out and do my interviews, and I go, was this hypothesis correct or was it incorrect, right? So I'm gonna give you guys maybe a potential problem. I wanna see if you guys can come up with any hypothesis around this, right? So I was thinking over the weekend, everyone have seen those like, oh, complete the survey at the bottom of your receipt, right? I feel like no one completes those at all, ever. So what do you think the problem is there? What's a hypothesis? Who do you think would benefit from it? Yeah. There's no incentive to do it. So that's a statement. How do you make that into a hypothesis?
If I had, for example, $5 credit to the store.
Right. So then your hypothesis would be, we would get people to fill out the survey more by adding a $5 incentive. And then so what would be a question you would ask to your potentially customers? It could be a no trick question. It could be as simple as, would you be willing to fill out the survey for $5, right? Like, you should ask it, right? Don't assume that they're gonna say yes, because some people be like, you know, go to a person that's making $300,000 a year, they'd be like, nah, right? But a student might be like, oh yeah, no, totally. Right, any questions here? No? Okay. Before you go into these interviews, you want to make sure that you're not wasting the people's time, right? So you want to go in prepared. You have to have your set of questions, come up with it beforehand, make sure it answers or disproves your hypothesis, and then just go out, talk to maybe 5, 10 people at a time, right? And then that way you'll get your answer to that specific hypothesis. And that doesn't mean you found your pain point. Yes?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, are you cold approaching these people in the medical industry? And also, like, what is the response rate like? Like, I'm sure you have a lot of doctors that kind of just brush you off and be like, oh, you know, I don't have time for that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering, like, how, you know what I mean? Like, what is that like?
So the advice I got on that is everyone loves students. You go up to them, it's like, hey, I have this project I'm doing, it's for school. Can you spend 5 minutes to help me out here? That'll tend to get a more positive response. I do cold outreach on LinkedIn. At the end of your interview, right, what you do is, hey, I want to gather more information. Can you refer me to like 1 or 2 of your colleagues, right? And then that'll branch off more and more and more.
Right.
So you just need one in. And just one more thought there. For me, I'd maybe reach out to maybe 10 people and get 1 response. So you have to be prepared to kind of for that kind of response rate. And nothing against you or whatever you guys are doing. Everyone's just busy, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
What do you think the reason is for the attraction of students?
I think it's everyone wants to help students, I think, because presumably as a student, you're not really doing it to make money off of them, right? You're there to learn. And I think, I like to think of the world in a more positive light, and everyone's a little more altruistic and be like, oh my God, I was a student one of these days, and I want to go out and help them. And then the people who say no, then those may or may not be the people you want to talk to. So, any other questions? Yep.
I had a comment, and also as students, we're the future of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So might as well help us.
Yeah. Don't give us a bad world to take over. Make sure we have all the tools to succeed. So, let's see. Okay, so any other questions around forming a hypothesis? Yep. You should always either do Zoom or in person. I say that because I personally think you pick up a lot on facial expressions. So not related to this, but we were on a trip to Montana to see a manufacturing plant. We go in there and we wanted to see if they can make our sensors. And we go, oh, look, we use silicone in our sensor. And then the engineer, everyone there just kind of went, it's like we took a big pile of dog crap and splat it on the table. And they went, oh my God, silicone is the biggest contaminant for our facility. We do not use silicone. you could hear that on the internet, you can hear that through the phone, but actually seeing their expression made us realize, oh crap, like this is like really bad. We're probably gonna have to take off our shoes and scrub it before we enter their facility and stuff. So yeah, anytime you can see their facial expression, you can see how engaged they are, that's always an added benefit. Okay, so that was really, yeah.
Are those ways that you determine the credibility of like for your hypothesis? So like the expressions of other people, like the responses?
I wouldn't say it's the only thing you should look at. There's a lot of other things you should be looking for. And so, I've done plenty of phone interviews with teaching nurses, right? People that have seen it and been it, and you can tell their enthusiasm. Just because they're enthusiastic doesn't mean they're necessarily giving you good information, right? So, want to be careful with that. Any other questions? Okay, so,
Actually, one more question.
oh, yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to-
Yeah, no worries.
So, I know she had mentioned the lung collapse, and like that was obviously a problem that was an immediate in need for a solution. But like, what's your motivation for even pursuing this industry, or like, what prompts you to go and look into research to try and see that? You know what I mean? Like, because realistically, it's the main motivation is money, and people are trying to profit. And you see in the medical industry, people will push pharmaceuticals that are killing people, but they make money off it. So I'm just saying, I'm just saying, what's your main motivation, and how has it kind of been deterred as you go into the industry? Because I'm sure those around you also might not have the same motivation as you.
Yeah, well, that's
You know what I'm saying?
a big can of worms. I'd say the motivation is going to vary from day to day, right? Someday you're like, oh, I need the money. Other days, like, well, like for me, it's always been like, if I can make one sensor that can save one life at one point in time, that's all I need, right? That's all I need to say, like, I made an impact on someone. We're looking more into the pediatric space recently. And my main thing is just like, who wouldn't want to save a baby, But with that said, you have hospitals with billions and billions of dollars, and they will just start looking at it as a number. And that's actually something that I overlooked in my notes, and thank you for reminding me, is when you go talk to people, there's a difference between your users and your customers, right? So my device, right, who would the users be? Just based off of everything you guys heard about so far. So patients, I heard patients, and then what else? What? Medical staff? Who would the customers be? Hospitals. So are the medical staff the same as the hospital? Right, so when you go in the interviews, you have to think, who's my medical staff, right? Who's my users? Who's my customers? Are their motivation different, right? So for hospitals, sadly, the admin, they go, we need to make money at the end of the day. So if your device can save us X amount of dollars per year, then yeah, of course we're gonna switch over to it. That's gonna be very different from your users, right? My nurse might care about saving 60 seconds to reduce stress, having a device that's gonna help the baby. But if the bottom line for the hospital doesn't change, then it might not be a good product for the hospital. And within medicine, it gets more complicated because you add in insurance, and then you get this complex web of connections between people. If you're doing a consumer product, your user is probably your customers, and that simplifies things a lot more. Right. Okay, just a couple of last things to consider. As you're going through this process, ask yourself, is the problem I'm hearing a big problem, right? So if the nurses go, I wish everything was wireless. I was like, yeah, no, that'd be great. But is that gonna, you go up to an investor and be like, I made the current monitors wireless. They're gonna be like, so what? Why wouldn't they just buy the wired version? They're doing just fine with that, right? So make sure you have a clear problem that you're targeting. We covered know your users and customers, right? Think about whether or not the pain point you found is easy to explain, because you're going to go out there, you're going to talk to all of these users and customers, they're going to give you your pain points, then you're going to have to go to your investors and say, hey, this is my pain point. The easier it is to explain it to them, for them to understand it, the easier it will be for you to get money, right? You know, should be obvious, but don't listen to just one opinion. I made this mistake. I talked to a NICU nurse, the head nurse in the NICU. He said, no, we don't need a respiratory monitor. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And then 5 months later, we talked to doctors and other people in teaching hospitals. They're like, no, we need a respiratory monitor. And I was just like, well, that's shame on me for just listening to the first voice that said we don't need it. And the last one is, you know, before this presentation, I actually went online and looked up, you know, the ideating process, finding a problem solution. And the funny thing was, I got these like, oh, 3-day crash courses, 5-day crash courses for finding a problem and a solution. I think it's far from that. We took about 3 months just doing interviews to find maybe a potential problem. And we're not even sure if this is the right solution right now, right? Until we actually go in and start selling the product and start making revenue, we won't really know if this is the right problem and solution, right? The ultimate confirmation is once you start making revenue. So that's why at YC they also say, you know, iterate and fail fast. That will get you to the right solution fastest. Okay? Any questions? That's all I had on the problem segment. Yep.
Would you say it's smart to find an industry or a problem area where you're a user yourself, or something that you're already interested in, or yeah, like, would you say you should focus your energy in, like, for you, it would be the medical field, I'm assuming, or would you say you could just like cast a broad net?
No, that's a good question. I mean, you look at someone like Elon Musk, and he has something in like the Boring Company, Neuralink, SpaceX, Tesla. He's definitely one that casted a wide net, right? I'd say for most people, when you want to enter a startup, you have an idea of some area you want to make a difference in. And so at the end of the day, I think when you're going to get no money, right, or when you're going to have to just do sweat equity, is that going to be a problem that you still want to solve, right? May or may not be in your area of expertise, right? But I'd say that would be the most important one. If you are the end user and customer, you have a leg up, right? Because now you already know the general field, so you can go out and ask more targeted questions for that area. Yeah. Yep.
When you were talking to like the customers, like the hospital, like whoever's in charge of this, how would you package your problem? Because you said some guys told you no. Like, how would you package your offer to them in a way that sounded more appealing to them?
So, thank you for asking that question, and I want to make a very good distinction here. When you do your interviews, you should never go in saying, I have the solution, right? Is this a good solution for you? And I apologize if I made it sound like that. You should go in with an open mind and ask general questions that could get you to their problem. So for example, if I were to talk to a nurse, my first open-ended question would be like, hey, do you have any problems with the current respiratory monitors? And if so, what are they? Right? Instead of saying, I have a monitor that can give you respiration in 5 seconds, right? You're biasing their answer in a certain way. So when you do your initial interviews, make sure it's open-ended and it's not leading them towards something you want to hear, right? So just wanted to make sure. I think I caught a little bit of like, you know, giving them kind of what they may or may not want. Instead, you want to figure out what their problem is from the very beginning. And then afterwards, if you want to get feedback on your device, right, if you do have something, then you can go in and be like, hey, we have something here that can give you this X, Y, and Z, right? Do you want this? Is this a value to you, right? And it's a very gray area, like where the questions fall into. Did that answer your question?
I was more talking about like when you're like sitting down in
Yeah.
front of some decision maker.
Yeah.
Like, did you just straight up say, oh, like, here's a product, your nurses and your doctor said, we have this issue, this would fix it? Or did you package it in a way, like, sell it? Like, I'm talking about from a sales, like, kind of standpoint.
Oh, okay.
How did you, like, present it to them in a way that they feel like they want it for
Yeah, so when I go up to them, and this is where you are in your interview process. In the very beginning, I would just be like, hey, I heard that, hospitals want to make money, or like, I wouldn't say it like that, but, I want to make sure that you guys are profitable. If I had a device that gave you this amount of profit, is it something of interest to you, right? Or maybe the other way to put it is like, are there any big problems that's costing you profits right now in the hospital, right? Instead of saying like, hey, I have a device that you can use right now, it's like, what do you want from me, right? If I were to give you the device you want. Any other? Yep.
Michael, thank you so much for being here. I know we all appreciate your insights into all the problems and solutions that entrepreneurs have to deal with. My question is, what strategies do you recommend for staying ahead of emerging problems in dynamic markets?
I feel like that's also a very big can of worms. So within medicine, right, there's this one book, I forgot who wrote it, but they talk about within at least the medical field, you have your people who are looking for change, right? And then you have like your bread and butter doctor, the ones that goes, I've learned this is fine, we're saving lives, don't need any change. And doctors are notoriously known for being stubborn and not wanting to adopt new technology. So in that case, I would focus on the people at the forefront of the field, the KOLs, the key opinion leaders in that field, to look at what they think the next step should be. Right? So for example, again, from Akani, we looked at a bunch of KOLs and anesthesiologists, huge in safety, and they all told us, we need better monitors for breathing, right? Across the board. There's people dying in procedures where they shouldn't be dying. You go into a dental chair, you get a couple deaths a year for that. And that's what they told us. For the rest of the field to catch up to what they're saying, right? They look to those people, and then those people will generally be the ones that kind of know what direction the field should be going, right? So just look for those experts within the field. Any other questions? Yep.
I know you went into like knowing like what problem's big enough for you to solve, or like if it's not worth solving. Can you
Yeah.
go more in depth into that? Like how do you gauge your problem's worth solving?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me think for a second. Sadly, at the end of the day, it probably just comes down to how much money you can potentially make in that area. So it's not something where you can look at it and be like, oh, that's a big problem. What I did was I sat down, took out an Excel sheet, looked at the market size, the maybe estimated cost it's causing. If I came out with a solution, how much could I personally, like the company personally make, like off of that? You also have market reports, which could be good or bad. That tells you, this is a X billion-dollar market, a new device. This is costing the U.S. Doctors X million of dollars. So a very good example would be like asthma. Everyone would say like, oh, treatment's costing this amount of money, right? And then if I came up with a new treatment, then we would probably be in that ballpark range. Yep. Yep.
When it comes to the medical, like you mentioned, there's a bunch of problems that come up. So how do you stay focused with one problem and stick with it when there's like a whole slew of other problems coming around?
Yeah, so it's you could stick with the problem. You might find down the line that problem isn't as big as you thought it would be, right? So you have to keep an open mind and be like, okay, this is a problem. I'm going to try to solve it at a later point in time, or maybe this is a big problem, but now this problem's even bigger. So so what does it cost? What's the resources to kind of pivot to the new problem or solution? Yeah.
And a follow-up question. So let's say you did stick with that problem. You went through, you put the resources in and everything. But then now you found out that there's like someone else who's doing somehow the same problem as you, and maybe even finish faster than you. So then what happens to that current project that you worked on? Do you just scrap it?
Yeah, that's where you have to be creative and think of a different approach for it. You could go out and compete with them, right? Maybe if the big companies like Medtronic and I go, you know what, I have one extra little thing that they can't do, maybe they'll end up being your the company that acquires you, right? On that note, I did have some other ideas on items for like coming up with ideas. A lot shorter, but depends on whether or not you guys want to continue here or kind of listen to kind of idea formation and generation. Okay, so really quickly, how much time do we have? Okay.
Here, we got time.
Okay. So you talked about someone else coming up with the same ideas, getting to the solution faster. In general, as you're coming up with your problem, what we did was we kind of in parallel tried to come up with a solution as we heard the problem, right? And this term ideating, I honestly never quite heard of it until recently. But in my opinion, right, being from a research field as an engineer, ideas I feel like comes about very easily if you have a good team with an open environment, no judgment, right, and you can just talk there. So an example I always give is I lived with a bunch of engineers. They're all my friends in the PhD program. And every now and then we'll sit down and have dinner. And during that dinner, we'd come up with like maybe 5 really dumb ideas. Like it's just be like left field. Something like we came up with was like a AI system for determining whether or not your idea was stupid. Like, how dumb of an idea did you come up with? And then we went, well, you could maybe flip that and determine how innovative your idea might be. But the main important thing is we had a safe space where everyone can come up with ideas and it just flowed. Like we maybe had like a problem someone would say and then we just start bouncing ideas back and forth. And I think coming up with ideas, that's the most important aspect. It might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised how often someone doesn't say something because they're afraid of being judged or afraid of someone going, that's stupid, that's dumb. Like even small comments like that, could deter someone from just saying something. So, come up with 100 ideas, one of them must be good, right? How do you get to that good idea? The first question you should ask is, do we need it or is it just a fun idea? So an example I'll give is when we were coming up with our device, we need to find a way to activate the device while making it waterproof. And we were like, oh, we could have a little magnet in there, and then when we pull off a tab that's on the other side, the magnet's going to fall and complete a circuit. We ended up just using a pull tab with some rubber stopper on either side, right? So you can come up with a bunch of creative ideas, but they might not be the right ones. A couple other things to think about, whether or not your idea is feasible, right? So is it going to be a high-cost idea? Is it going to be a low-cost idea? Will it be able to make you money? You're not going to know the answer, but you could have a ballpark idea of like whether or not it's good or not, right? And then to your point, think about what other companies have done. If you came up with an idea, look it up. Are there other patents around it? Has other companies done it before? Are they successful or are they not successful? If they're not successful, figure out why you're different, and then go and implement it. Right, so, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually was thinking about that. Like, how has the patent process been in your own personal business?
Yeah, so for Makani, we kind of had the solution first. So we had all the patents from UCI that we then licensed from UC Irvine. The entire patent process, come up with an idea, find a patent lawyer, put together a provisional that protects it for a year, and then you go through the long process of turning it into a real patent. And there is fees at every single step of the way. So you can come up with 10 ideas today and then you expect to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to just protect that idea. So be mindful of what you're going to protect don't just go out there and willy-nilly say like, oh, I'm gonna come out with a rounded corner for the new phone, so I'm gonna patent that idea. Which, funny enough, I met the lawyer who did that for Apple, and I was about to make a joke about it, and then he interrupted me before and said like, oh, I actually worked on that patent. So, and again, like for this process as well, it's still an iterative process. So you're not going to come up with the best idea overnight. You just have to continuously talk, criticize your own thoughts and ideas, and see if it's going to work out or not, right? And then user feedback is always important. Once you establish your rapport with these customers, you can always, I always ask them, I was like, hey, if I come out with something new, can I bounce it off of you? And 9 times out of 10, they go like, oh yeah, of course, right? So, okay, any questions? Yep.
You were just talking about also like kind of going through the legal aspects of it. So how did you, like in your own personal experience, how has it been with like copyright probably and all these other laws and making sure that everything is fine so you're not kind of like in trouble?
Yeah. There's so many things you would have to worry about early on in a startup company. I put that near the bottom. Make sure you have the provisionals to protect it. If you're, make sure you're like up to date, you're not doing anything bad. But I would personally think the bigger focus should be around whether or not you have a good problem, a good solution, and then just basic protection around it. Once you take off, right, that's when talk to your patent lawyer and get everything shored up.
So then is that going to be part of the process right before you do your hypothesis? Or is that just a continuous thing you keep going back to?
That kind of varies from company to company. Most people, unfortunately, they generally have a solution that they're looking for a problem for. So like we already had the patents in place for us, right, before we went out and actually found a problem that we could solve. So this entire process isn't serial, black and white, step 1, step 2, step 3. You'll go to step 3 and then realize you have to go back to step 1 and then jump to step 7, step 8. So don't have a regimented thought of how you're going to approach this process. Yep.
How important has that network of guys that you met in the PhD program been for you? And also, have you used relationships from previous to the PhD program that have benefited you?
Yeah, I would say most of my networks actually started with Michelle. So my friends personally, they're my friends and they have networks I can access to, but weirdly enough, like my dad's not just an engineer, but kind of in a very stable engineering job. But weirdly enough, he had friends who were, connected in Taiwan or with other people that I was able to access as well. So never from any one source. Yep. Yeah, so like if we were sitting down, you came up with an idea, I'd be like, okay, like no matter what I think about it, I'll hear you out. And then I think the number one thing, it's two-sided, right? I will not judge any ideas you give me, right? But you also have to understand that if I do give you any criticism, it's not an attack on you, but it's just to get to the right step or the right solution faster. Right, so you might say something, I'll be like, hey, like, I noticed you said something here, but have you considered this? Right, I like this idea here, but then I don't think it's gonna work out here for this reason, right? So never make it into a personal attack with like, that's so dumb, or something like that. And maybe with friends you can, but like when you're working professionally, always kind of have a reason for it. Any other questions? That was everything I had in here. So if you guys want to ask any questions on problem solving, coming up with ideas, my experience in YC. Yep.
Where was it and like what did you
Yeah, so I was actually in Michelle's lab at UCI in the BME department. What was the other part of your question? My focus was mainly around soft-wearable electronics, so applying it for measuring different vital signs, focusing in on respiration monitoring. Yep. So pretty fun. I enjoyed it. Any other questions? Yep.
When did you begin that research?
When did I begin that research? I think I started the respiration part specifically around 2016, 2017 maybe, ish. I started the PhD in 2014. I think I matched with Michelle 2015 and then did some microfluidic stuff and then went into more wearables the last 3 years of my PhD. Yep.
How did you know that biomedical engineering was the right career choice for you?
I didn't. So after I graduated from high school, I was like, oh, what major can I go into? Oh, biomedical engineering sounds exciting. And then was able to transfer into the UCSD program. I actually got in as an undeclared major. And then they just happened to open up the major my sophomore year. And so I entered. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And couldn't quite find a job after I graduated, so I decided to go into the graduate school. Did you have a question back there?
Yeah, I was wondering, so once you thought of the idea, like how did you like patent the idea? How did that work? How did you expand that?
So once I thought of an idea, how did I patent it?
Like patent it, patent.
Yeah, and then what was the second part?
And like how did you expand that to other people?
Expand it to other people. So, I mean, not an expert on the whole patent process, but having done it a few times, you come up with an idea, and then what you would go for is a provisional patent. And what the patent lawyer will help you do is identify what the state of the art is and how you're different, right? And so for an engineer, I forgot what the term is, but it has to be non-obvious that your solution will solve the problem. And so as an engineer, everything is logical. It follows a set step of, we think logically. It was like, of course it's going to solve the problem. How is it non-obvious? But you have to kind of warp your head and think, well, everyone's solution out there went towards making something bigger. We decided to make something smaller, right? So identify what your claims are, how you're going to be different, put together your provisional, and then your patent lawyer is going to help you go through the rest of that process. Not necessarily something I think most people would do themselves, but it's pretty boilerplate after you've done a couple. Was there a hand somewhere here? Yep.
So with the product, I don't know if you said this earlier, but like with the product you made, did you like start your own company or were you working for a company?
So yeah, it started in Michelle's lab. And I still remember the exact conversation we had. We were driving back from UCLA Harbor. And then I remember Michelle just turned to me and was like, so you want to do a startup around this technology? And I was like, sure. And that's basically how it started. Makani Science. Makani means wind in Hawaiian. We used to have a couple of Hawaiian people on the team, so I'm not Hawaiian. Was there a question here? Yep.
Considering that you have such a strong academic and engineering background, and that probably influences your way of thinking, as you kind of alluded to earlier, what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses in terms of problem identification and solution generation that you think you have as a result of that engineering?
I think you always want to be careful of your own biases, however you say it. You will always enter something thinking, I think I know what the solution's going to be. When you go into your interview process, you kind of want to just try to get rid of that as much as you can. So when you go in and try to find a problem, just think, I'm just here to listen. I'm not going to inject any of my own bias into this process. When you're coming up with a solution, I would almost say it's the same thing, actually. Be open to other solutions out there and then understand why it may or may not work, right? So, I have a sensor that I really like, right? That sensor might not be the solution for everything. So then the question I always ask myself is, what's the minimum number of sensors I can put into a patch that gets me what I want, right? It could be my sensor, it could be something else, but don't be kind of pigeonholed into, don't have that tunnel vision saying my solution is going to be the best for everything. Any other questions? Yeah.
What do you know now that you wish you had known?
Wish I knew when I was when?
When you were.
Oh, I would say the one thing I decided, and this is kind of more personal for my PhD as well, I made the decision that I decided what I was going to give and take on, right? So, for my PhD, I decided I want a good lab, good PI. I'm not going to care what research I do, as much, right? And that's greatly helped. Within the company, I made the decision, or now I would look back and make the decision, a good team, right, is so much more important than anything else starting out, because you're going to want to have a team that, when you're just putting in the sweat equity, when you don't have the money, everyone's willing to contribute their equal share, and you're going to go through that entire hardship knowing that the person next to you is going to be the reason you succeed. You shouldn't want to care about money. Of course, there are situations where, you need to have money, right? No one can't live without money. But I made the decision that that wasn't going to be a deciding factor for the company. And you're all going to have your own kind of decision to make around that, right? But I decided that the team was going to be, or now I think the team is going to be the most important part. And that's also what YC looks for as well. They don't care about the idea you're coming in with, like they do to a certain extent, but they want to see you have a good team built up and ready to put in that work.
Without going too much into details, our team basically imploded as we were going through YC.
Yeah, so that's why I say that. Yep.
How would you say you do have a bad team? What would you do to kind of either get rid of them or call them over to being good?
Ooh, well, I don't think I'm very good at answering that question because I didn't do it. Honestly, I think it depends on the person, right? I think if the collective team thinks that person is no longer a good fit, someone's going to have the tough conversation with that individual and be like, hey, I don't think you should be part of this team anymore. The longer you let it drag out, the harder it's going to be to do that, right? And that isn't to say you shouldn't try to correct any issues beforehand, but at a certain point, if you realize that individual's just toxic, dragging everyone else down, not putting in their work, you should let them go, right? Yep.
What would your best advice be for finding and putting together a quality strong team?
Isn't there a talk on this one as well?
Yeah, but they
in
want
the
to know
schedule?
what you think.
What I think.
What are your top 3 things that will do that?
Oh, so you may or may not like this, but I actually realized that my gut feel helps a lot. I used to think that you don't really trust your gut, but then I've realized 9 times out of 10, if I meet someone and I feel like something's just a little off and I can't quite put my finger on it, there's something that's a little off. So I've learned to trust that feeling. Me personally, as a person, I will stay guarded when I meet someone for the first time. And then as I talk to them more and more, interact with them more and more, then I go okay, I think this person is pretty good. So I would say for me, that is the number one thing. The other thing is just time. You can't know someone in an hour, right? Just talk to them, interact with them, be transparent with them. Be like, hey, I enjoy working with you. Maybe we can potentially put together a team and maybe the chemistry is there, maybe it isn't. One of the other things I think is important is understanding where your shortcomings are and finding someone that can supplement it, right? So for example, for myself, I'll like look at something and try to make it perfect. And then I need someone to kind of be like, no, we need to get this done now, right? And having that kind of complementary and just in general, very basic, like open communication with that person's important. So knowing that you talk to them, they're not going to throw you under the bus. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to do any of that. If they do, you know, either kick them out or it's no harm, no foul. And, you know, that's just the dynamic.
All right, give a round of applause for our speaker, Michael. All right, so here's what we're going to do for our activity because we've been sitting for too long. We've been soaking this up. We have exactly 20 minutes left in class. That means I'm going to give you probably 12 minutes because it's going to take you 3 to get back together. But you have to rapidly find a team and go find a space and a whiteboard. Rapidly come up with some sort of idea that you think will work. Try to pitch your own, that's fine. Come up with something new. Maybe this inspired something else. And then get ready to come back because you're all going to be pitching, the groups will be pitching 30-second pitches to YC, just right here, and then, you know, whatnot. So this is a chance to just, again, practice finding a team, making leadership decisions quickly, coming up with some sort of an idea or a plan. You can take certain things that he said to pull on those threads, right? If he said something about it, maybe that's the angle you go with. Come up with a rapid set of problems, come up with a product, a service, or some sort of technology, come up with something tangible, then work on your little elevator pitch, and we'll come back in the last 5 minutes. We'll just do this barrage of pitches, and then you choose the one that you think is most likely to get into YC, and we'll give you a big prize. How's that sound? Big prize. All right, round of applause again for our guest speaker. And you can float around and kind of like peek in and stuff like that. On your mark, get set, go. Find a place, find a spot, figure it out, come back here with 5 minutes left in class.